I'm Sam Manzillo, and this is my CA mini project. So let's begin with the research question. Can tailgating increase traffic flow? Okay, so what system states are we going to use to try to answer this? So we've defined three different states, the first being an empty space, or a space where there are no cars. The second being a space occupied by what we're going to call a normal car. And the third being a space occupied by a tailgating car. And then lastly, on the bottom here, I've just added a visual that I'm just going to be calling a guardrail, which you'll see in some of the videos, which bounds the highway or the road just to make it look a little bit nicer. Okay, what assumptions did we make? The first is that traffic is always going to flow from left to right. Okay, that's easy. The second is we're going to use open boundaries, so cars drive on the highway and drive off the highway. So cars are created on the left and destroyed on the right. The third is that cars are always going to react to the cars in front of them. So we're going to use asynchronous updates. And I think this is pretty reasonable for the real world. The next is that cars and tailgaters are both going to enter the highway with probabilities P and PT, and PT is always going to be less than P. Cars and tailgaters are both going to exit the highway with probability P. Cars and tailgaters prefer lanes to their left. So given the choice between switching lanes left or switching right, cars and tailgaters are always going to go left. We're going to say that cars and tailgaters never look behind them. They only care about these spaces directly in front of them. And lastly, when we initialize our highway, we're going to fill the highway with cars and tailgaters according to our probabilities P and PT, and also ensure that normal cars are always given the necessary space in front of them at initialization so that they are not accidentally initialized in a tailgating state. Okay. So here's our rule book, and the crucial takeaway here is that it's almost identical for both cars and tailgaters. The only difference being that cars look 2 spaces in front of them when making decisions, and tailgaters only look 1 space in front of them. So starting from the top here, if a car sees 2 empty spaces in front of it, it will move forward 1 space. If a tailgater sees 1 empty space in front of it, it will move forward 1 space. If a car sees that any of the 2 spaces in front of it are blocked, it's going to try to move to the left if those spaces are free. Tailgater is going to do the same, but only if the 1 space in front of it is blocked. And then lastly, cars are going to try to move into the right lane if the left lane is blocked. Tailgater, same thing, but only looking 1 space ahead. And then if neither of the 3 options are available for both, they will stay where they are and not move. Okay, so let's run some simulations. Starting on the left-hand side here, I have simple 1 lane with a probability of cars 0.8 and no tailgaters. And we can see that traffic moves along pretty nicely here. There's a little bit of slowdowns at a few moments, a little bit of traffic, but generally things are going along fine. So now on the right-hand side, I'm going to show the same thing, 1 lane, same probability for cars, but now we're going to add a high probability that a car is a tailgater. And here we can see that, again, traffic is actually moving along nicely. There's clearly a lot more cars on the road. It's congested, but we're not seeing signs of obvious traffics or major slowdowns. Okay, so how can we quantify this a little bit? Well, mostly we're going to be looking at what is the flow of vehicles per lane off the map, through the highway. And when I ran all this with much longer time steps than what you just saw for a variety of tailgater probabilities, we saw that as we increase the number of tailgaters on the road, we actually see many more cars driving through the highway. So clear evidence that tailgating increases traffic flow. Okay, so let's add some more lanes. Again, starting on the left-hand side, we have the probability of cars at 0.8 and no probability of tailgaters. So you can see that traffic is moving along pretty nicely. We have a lot of cars switching lanes, no clear signs of blockages, maybe a few slowdowns. Moving on to the right-hand side, again, we have a high probability of tailgaters now added in to our 4 lanes, and we can see some slowdowns, way more congestion, but again, traffic is still moving about as well as it was before. Okay, so here's the statistics for 4 lanes over much longer time trials. And the trend is almost identical as it was for 1 lane. When we start to add tailgaters, the number of cars driving through the highway actually increases. Okay, so what if we have 40 lanes? So on the left-hand side here, we have 40 lanes and the same probability of cars and no probability of tailgaters. You can see a lot of lane switching going on, some slowdowns in certain lanes, but generally, again, traffic is moving along fine. On the right-hand side, again, we have a high probability of tailgaters and the same probability for cars, and we see, again, much more congestion. We do see some evidence of slowdowns, but the overall trend is that cars are still moving on and off, basically with ease. And here is the summary statistics for 40 lanes with remarkably similar statistics. It's clear that as we increase the number of tailgaters, the number of vehicles driving through the highway also increases. Okay, so what can we conclude from this? Well, clearly tailgating can increase traffic flow. And if we can make some guesses as to why that is, I think the most obvious thing is that really what we've defined here is a more efficient use of space, more cars per square meter or mile or whatever you choose. Basically, by defining the tailgater activities, we've basically crammed more cars into our highway and allowed more cars to drive through. So does this reflect reality at all? I'm going to say probably not, mostly because we're missing like a few key pieces of what actually happens in reality here. The first is that we're not considering car velocities or accelerations at all. So we're not putting into consideration if a car does have to stop, how much time does it come back up to speed, etc. We're also not using dynamic spacing, which is probably what we would want to do in the real world. If a car is driving faster, it would probably want to leave more space in front of it than if it's driving slower. We're ignoring all of that. And lastly, we're not considering any external factors such as, I don't know, maybe distracted drivers or blockages in certain lanes due to an accident, etc. So in conclusion, tailgating can increase traffic flow. I am skeptical of what this actually tells us in reality. Thanks.